Morning, folks. This is Meadow, and I have with me Annie O'Neill. We are going to do a little presentation for the Pine Bush Artist Salon grant. The grant is funded by Arts Mid-Hudson and, and the Decentralized Program for the New York State. Annie is an incredible artist. She works with clay and metal, and she's going to tell you a little bit about her background. We're going to ask her questions that she's going to answer. And Annie's been a longtime friend who lives here in Gardner, New York. Annie.
Hi, everybody. I have been making art all my life in some form. I grew up on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and when we were in grade school, we took little crafts classes. My dad was so proud of us, he kept the ugliest pieces I made for years and years and years. And then I eventually went to the High School of Music and Art in New York City, which is today LaGuardia High School. We had art every day. I was mostly interested in painting at the time, although I do remember having a ceramics class and being very proud of what I now realize was a particularly ugly bowl with glass rocks in the bottom, but that was kind of magical to me. Eventually I went to Sarah Lawrence College, but I felt like it didn't really compare to the art that I had at the High School of Music and Art, so I took a little break from it. Eventually I ended up living in Cambridge, Massachusetts for 2 years, where I took a wood carving class, which was not meant to be my particular art. And then I came back to New York City. I don't know how to describe this exactly, but by accident, I ended up with a Mexican folk art gallery. My mom and dad had a small store. They needed extra warehouse space. And so I went to Mexico and I started buying folk art, which really resonated with my sensibilities about color and shape, pieces that were whimsical and inspirational to me. So I had this store in New York City for approximately almost 15 years. And I was at the time commuting back and forth to Gardner, to a house that I had spent time at in 1952. I know that dates me. It was a boarding house on North Mountain Road, and I ended up buying that house as a weekend house in probably 1971. When I came up here full-time in 1980, a few years after that, I did have a boyfriend who was working making large scale steel sculptures, very modern, but something about the material intrigued me. I had worked in silver for a while, and I was interested in making intricate cuts in the metal. And so I thought maybe it would be interesting for me to try steel. And I had long, thin pieces, and I made birds. I've always, for some reason, this is steel, by the way, this porcupine. I've been interested in making a material not seem like the material it is. So even though this is 1/8 inch mild steel, after it's cut, I could hammer it with a sledgehammer to make the form, and then I modified a chisel to put the quills out, and so people think, oh, this is probably very thin steel, but actually it took a lot of muscle power, which I had at the time. I then met people at Women's Studio Workshop in Rosendale, and that was the start of a different trajectory for me.
Oh, what year was that in?
That was, I probably was there in 1987 for the first time. And it was like a big family then. It's a little bit more corporate now, but that helps with donations and their ongoing programming. But someone there, Margaret Henkels, started a little ceramics class. And so we would go through raku and pit firings and paper clay and making a paper kiln, and it was just great fun. And then I decided maybe I had always had an interest. My main interest is in painting, and with ceramics, doing it the way I do it, it's like painting without the pressure of having a canvas in front of you and all the questions that brings up. Is it finished? Do I need a different color? And I see this is just a painting I did recently. You can keep changing things. It's very, you can go over colors that don't work well together. With ceramic glazes, it's much harder. And so really, I would say that I am, with each piece, winging it more or less. You don't know when you see a glaze in a jar or in a little plastic container what color it will really end up being. Because many of the underglazes, and I'll get back to explaining what kind of clay I use, many of them depend on 3 coats to make it opaque. So if it's 1 coat, you know, you get little color swatches on big papers, but they're never accurate. So part of the fun for me of doing this is treating it not as glaze, but as paint. And so I'm always surprised with how the pieces end up. So I'm using low fire earthenware. That means that when it's fired, it's a much lower temperature, maybe 1800 degrees lower than porcelain, which is the highest temperature, or stoneware. I make the piece, the form. I don't make every piece I do. I do sometimes get slip cast bowls because I'm not a wheel person, and so bowls are harder for me to make. Not platters, which you could call a bowl. I mean, I could make a bowl, but it wouldn't be a perfect bowl. Throwing, I realized, meeting a lot of ceramic people at Women's Studio Workshop, it's an art, but it's also a skill. It's hard to believe that the best, there are world records for throwing pots on the wheel, and currently the world record for 1 hour is 220 pots. Realize he's wedged the clay, which is getting it ready ahead of time, but that's extraordinary. So if someone could make me 50 pots in an hour, I would be happy to have them, and then I could decorate them. I don't have that need to make the form, and also because I'm using clay a little differently than most people who make a perfect form and then use I use the glaze as paint and not as a dipping mechanism. So a lot of people will dip their pieces or dip part of it, and that's not the process that I use. So anyway, I'm very attracted to animals. Well, you could see all the steel pieces I was doing at first were all birds. They were, believe it or not, 5 feet high. They had thousands of cuts made with an oxyacetylene torch.
Now, did you make all those cuts? Or
I
did
made all those cuts. And the funny thing is that I did maybe 1 or 2 craft fairs with steel pieces in probably the early 80s. And the people who appreciated my work the most were people who worked on auto bodies, because I was so, and I'm not being modest. I mean, I didn't know I was really good at cutting, but it just, it was like meditating. You're working with a torch and a flame, and it's very important to start the cut with the right pressure, probably the way very talented spray painters can work a nozzle so that they start gently and then can use it as a drawing tool. So I was able to really draw with a torch. I've always had a mental block against painting on canvas, but I can draw when I'm working on a different surface, like steel or clay. And for many years, I did all the backdrops for the Mohawk Mystery Weekend. That entailed painting 48 7-foot by 8-foot pieces of cardboard that were then set up into little tableaus that people would be acting in. There would be props in them. Maybe it took me 2 weeks to do that. It was really fun. I got to meet people like Stephen King, who was in a mystery, Don Westlake, Elmore Leonard, all these mystery writers that you know probably. I'm not a mystery fan. Evan Hunter, Larry Block. They would be the featured mystery people, and they would take part in this one-night event that I made all those paintings for. But painting on canvas is not my thing, but experimenting with clay and glazes is a lot of fun. When I look back at some of my early drawings, and you can see some of them on my website, Annie O'Neill Painted Clay. I was doing basically the same kind of intricate line work that I'm doing on some of my ceramics. So I don't really know, I've never taken a course, a serious course in ceramics, except the ones at Women's Studio Workshop. And so everything I do is kind of made up. I love, as I was saying, I love animals. I'm also very influenced by Mexican folk art. Some of the wall paintings that you find in the Mexican ruins. Just a few years ago, I went to the state of Tlaxcala in Mexico and saw incredible murals, ancient, kind of crumbling, but they really influenced my palette a lot. And so I'm inspired by the pieces of folk art that I have in my house. Most of the time when I'm walking, I'm thinking about color. I'll start a piece and it'll have maybe 3 or 4 different colors, and then I think, what color will go with it? And so it constantly interests me to work out colors almost intuitively, because I know I learned about color charts and wheels and stuff like that, but I don't remember that stuff unless I've just absorbed it. And obviously I'm interested in happy colors. I think my pieces are upbeat, and I hate to use the word fun, but I don't take myself so seriously, so these are amusing and kind of fun to look at, with a lot of different things going on.
Okay,
And,
let me ask you some questions.
oh.
You talked about your background and where you went to school.
Yeah.
Now, was that college as well?
I went to Sarah Lawrence College,
Oh, that's right.
and it's a very particular kind of progressive place where you only take 3 courses a year, and you concentrate in areas. It was not the right place for me in retrospect, and even I even found a letter I wrote to my sister saying, why didn't I go to Rhode Island School of Design or the Boston Museum School? Because I really wanted to be making art, but it was kind of limited at the time there. I didn't like my painting teacher that much, and I was doing very kind of abstract expressionist pieces. So it didn't really further my artistry that much. It was only later when I came up here and was in the city that I began to focus a little bit more. I also forgot to say that when I had my Mexican folk art store, one of the first people who came in early on was Nelson Rockefeller. And so his memory was jolted a bit because he had gone to Mexico in 1933 and bought a lot of pieces which were in storage. And that kind of started a whole new inspiration for him to start showing these pieces along with his paintings, along with his African and, of course, Oceanic collection, which his son had made in New Guinea. And so I worked early on a show that was at the Museum of Primitive Art. He dispatched me to Mexico to buy more pieces to update his collection. And while he was in Washington, D.C., and then came back to New York, he would always visit my store and buy more pieces. Eventually, after he left the vice presidency, he started to work on books about his various collections. So the first one was about his primitive art collection, and I think there was one about all the architecture he was involved with, Albany, New York City, all over the place. He worked with Edward Durrell Stone a lot. And then it was time, and he wanted to work on a book about his Mexican folk art collection. So I coordinated that project. In fact, we all went to Mexico together in 1978, just really months before he died. And we were in the process of finishing the book when he died. The book was ultimately finished with the help of his daughter, who I advised to buy the collection. And then she hired me to give the collection away to a museum or to museums. And I spent a year going in from Gardner to New York City to work in her office and look at demographics of different cities. And the collection eventually went to the San Antonio Museum of Art and then to the Mexican Museum in San Francisco. So that was an interesting period of my life working on that.
It's nice that it was the collection was kept together. And
oh, absolutely, because otherwise the collection would have been auctioned off. Yeah. His wife, Happy, at the time didn't like the collection particularly, and if he had lived, I was going to work with him on decorating a ranch that he was going to build in Texas. It was, he had acreage, not comparable to the King Ranch, but it was pretty big. And I think one of his sons actually has that ranch today. So, but it would have been fun finding all this Mexican wrought iron and furniture and folk art. So, let's see, what else can I tell you about myself?
some of your ongoing projects?
Well, another interesting ongoing project, which has been on hold since COVID, is we have a Gardner open studio tour, and Meadow is part of that tour. It was started by a few people, and then Lady Pink and Roger Smith, known as Smith, came to live in Gardner, down the road from me. And she started a door project, and we all painted doors that were around the roads initially in Gardner. And then we had some in Meadows, was outside of Kiss My Face in Gardner. It was so happy and jolly, and I think Meadow and I have the same color sensibility. And then I became better friends with Lady Pink and her husband, and they invited me to help on a mural down in Astoria, Queens. It's called the Welling Court Street Art Festival. Takes place in June. So I had a portion of a 70-foot by 9-foot wall. My portion was maybe 8 feet by 9 feet. And I would go down with them, and we would paint over 2 days. And I did this for 2 years. And I think that it'll happen again. I don't know if it happened last year, but I've continued to be friends with them, and they've kind of expanded my horizon a bit. She was the person who encouraged me to have a website because I am more low tech. So I'm very happy to have a website and have more people see my work. And I hope to work on future projects with them.
What is your website again?
Annie O'Neill paintedclay.com. No apostrophe, all small letters.
And are all your works, or is all your works available for sale?
All my works are available for sale. I haven't really had work in stores because, as you probably know, stores and galleries take 50% or 30%, and I don't want to price my pieces out of the market.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like to sell my work so I can make more work.
Now, would people contact you through your website?
Yeah, they can contact me through my website. My phone numbers are on there.
Okay.
And of course, they can come and see my work safely with a mask and a shield if they'd like. But a lot of craftspeople and artists have everything on hold now for probably a year, and maybe it'll be more than a year because of COVID.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And I would say that this concludes your session.
Thank you very much, Annie.
And we
Thank you for having me part of this great project. Thank you for writing the grant, Meadow, and getting the grant. That's the most important part of writing a grant. And I hope you've enjoyed and been interested and maybe found out something new about my little talk today.
Yes, it was great.
Very good. Thank you so much for your generous time.
You're
Out of your
welcome.
very busy day, I'm sure.
Not very busy day.
I was trying to build that
Oh,
up.
yes. One thing, can I?
Sure.
One thing that I'd like to say is that I love this area, the Shawangunks, outside my house, outside of my town, because it offers us so many opportunities to hike, to rock climb, to walk on the carriage roads. And I think that when I was a child and I came here, we used to play in the Taylor Slope below Millbrook and walk alongside streams, in streams, and that really influenced my wanting to be up here. It's just a culturally and environmentally rich area.
And people are really, really nice to each other. The artists help each other. It's a very nice community.
I agree. It's not a cutthroat New York City art scene here. Everybody is accessible. You don't have to send a message and say, "Can I call you at a certain time?" So yes, I just love being up here, and hopefully you'll get to go on the Gardner Open Studio Tour when it happens within the next year.
Okay, thank you.